we have the house vintage signature blend that you described to us before. I'm curious, it doesn't look like you chose booze as your pairing. Curious why you wanted to go with some caffeine instead. Or is there a best pairing with this cigar?
Yes, actually there is. I did go with coffee on my first one because of those creamy notes. But for this, my favorite, because like I said, I blended this cigar for me every day. And that was kind of what I was trying to achieve and giving that back to the consumer. Balvenie, 12-year double wood.
Fair enough. I will say the Buchanan isn't bad either. Decided to get that out of the world. It's not bad. So, you were blending this with Nick in the midst of a global pandemic.
No.
You started early.
Before the vintage was the vintage. My first hand at it was 2016.
Oh.
Similar blend. My first ever go at it with the first samples I got. And then I was like, put it on the back burner. And then back in 2019, when this was underway, I got the first samples and started smoking them. And then in 2020, I got a couple more. And then that's kind of when we finalized it, was in 2020. So by the summer of 2020, when this was full-blown construction, is when we finalized the selection of the blend.
So the vintage managed to open at what we thought was going to be the downfall in the graph of everything related to COVID and everything around it. And crazily enough, it was after that first weekend that the governor went ahead and said, all right, let's open up, social distancing requirements, but everything was kind of getting back to slowly but surely what we wanted as a sense of normalcy. Just curious your take on how did the coronavirus affect this industry as it pertains to cigars? We've talked already with previous guests about how it affects Charlotte and hospitality, but as a whole, what did you see in the cigar world?
So people started smoking more cigars. I mean, that's the first thing you can say. From 2019 to 2020, with the complete shutdown, cigar consumption went up 42%, give or take, in general.
That's a huge number.
So if you're making, we'll use a baseline, 20 million cigars a year, and now your one factory, one brand, has gone up 5%, 10%. You're trying to keep up. At the same time, you got boxes, cellophane, etc. So once you're already growing, and then you have a shutdown where you have to run your factory at 50% capacity, or you were shut down for 2 months and then couldn't even open, and then open back up. You're at 50% capacity with workers, and you have, let's say, call like a small brand, like they don't even make their own boxes. Now you don't have any boxes. You don't have any cellophane. What do? You got a demand for more product. You can't get tobacco out of the country from where you're getting it from because no countries are open. And you have less workers, and you have to do something. And the truth is, it's called back order. It really is. And this was the first time in my life of smoking cigars for 18 years that I've ever heard someone like Padron or someone like Fuente say everything's on back order. It's never happened before, because with the times and everything's changed, the demand wasn't the growth in general. I mean, you had 42 million more cigars into the country than last year, and then it grew in 21. 38% growth in new cigar smokers compared to 2019. So we joke in the cigar industry and say that COVID was bad for the cigar industry when it comes to production and everything that happened, but it was also good for it's called the new cigar boom, the COVID boom of the cigar industry, because people were at home and the shops, fortunately, that stayed open, and online businesses, etc. People started smoking more cigars, man. And then at the end of the day, you have to make more cigars. And if you don't have cellophane, you don't have boxes, you just start shipping them. And that's what, I mean, honestly, we got some stuff last week, didn't even have boxes because they don't have boxes. So they're like, do you want it? I was like, just give it to me. I'll figure it out. I'll put it on the shelf without a box. So like it's starting to trickle down, and it took some time because a lot of the cigar companies, just like the distilleries, had reserves. They burned through their reserves in 2020. And this is a process of time. And if you don't have time and your demand's high, what do? You're not going to release, somebody like Fuente's not going to release product that's not ready, and you're going to burn through reserves. So you just say, I'm sorry, we're on back order. And that's the reality. Is back order is the word that no one wants to hear as a cigar retailer like us. But it is truly the reality of where we are today. And hopefully, I've been told from cigar manufacturers that they're slowly back to full production. But, it's going to take some time. You got to rebuild your reserves. Think of during the recession when the president opened up Fort Knox and pulled out gold to save the economy. It's like that. It's like that when it comes to cigars. They had to open up the vaults, sell all this stuff, and people kept buying it, and people are still buying it today. And fortunately for us, it's a good thing, but it's going to take some time to get back to normal. And I don't honestly know if it's considered normal. I think it's going to be the new normal. Mm-hmm. I mean, for example, a lot of cigar manufacturers didn't put cellophane on cigars before because that was their natural, traditional way, Cuban way, no cellophane. But now they are because of germs and et cetera and things that happen. So this is the new normal, and I think we're still getting through it. We're not nowhere. The cigar industry is nowhere out of it yet. I think it's going to take another year to two to get back to what production was and for everything to bounce back up.
And I see a comparison on the beverage side because, and especially as an individual consumer, if you're going to, you pick at your store and you're like, you get your typical poison of choice. Well, a lot of people weren't aware that the distilleries in Mexico had to shut down. Yeah. That in France, multiple operations had to shut down. Some of those places said 90 days, there's not a soul in the building. And then we get ready to open up a concept like this, and we're told by a rep, well, we don't know when there's true champagne that's going to be back in stock. We don't know when. And the ABC stores are saying we don't know when cognac or even some of the tequilas are going to be back because they were slowed down so much. For some reason, I think a lot of people just assume that, well, tobacco, it seems like an easier process, that, it's an old man's game, that, they probably had a ton in reserves, that it should have been real easy to just go ahead and play catch up, but that's clearly not the case. No. So I think you just answered my follow-up question, but at this point it could be 2023 before we can say things are going to be yes. as needed.
Fully, yes. But then you also have, not only did COVID affect it, but the demand went up. So with that, I'm sure in the spirits industry, demand went up too. So it's become difficult to catch up. So that's slowly happening. A lot of cigar manufacturers had to cut off, like we talked about earlier, mm-hmm. making products for the people because they just couldn't keep up, and they've had to move, production, which has changed things for some of these people. I mean, some of the cigar makers who don't control all the processes have either have no product to sell or have just, sold little bits at a time to what they can get by with. Mm-hmm. Fortunately, let's use my father as an example. Don Pepin's factory and his son, Jaime, because they control box, cellophane, tobacco, manufacturing, etc., they've been able to keep consistently. They had to even tell their other, people that they make stuff for, hey, we're going to still make yourself, we're just going to make a little less. We're going to take a little less, and then everybody wins in the end. They didn't just cut people off. Mm-hmm. So if you control all of your production, it's a little easier to come back from than someone who has to rely on this person for boxes, this person for cigar rings, this person for cellophane. And so in general, I think to be every single cigar brand to be fully whole again, we're talking maybe the beginning of 23.
So in the midst of that, you open up a cigar bar with this team. From an operational standpoint, I'm assuming that changes the way that you thought you were going to have your day-to-day go about. When it comes to managing that humidor and curating that inventory, how have you had to deviate from what you expected to make sure that there's, something here for everybody?
Well, we wanted to go back to the COVID thing. We wanted to have everyone be able to walk freely into the humidor, and it's part of the experience. But with everything happening with COVID, it's made it a lot more difficult. So we made that a more of a controlled room where someone has to let you in and then keep 1 or 2 people, 3 people at most in the room at all times, just to not make it where it's bogged down and people are crowded together. So that's kind of one thing that's affected our business model. Another thing we talked about was allowing, members, locker members to have backdoor access. And, maybe that's something we can do in the future. We'll see how that works out. But in general, when we open, we have a big hit, we have a lot of demand, then we get all the cigars in. And I've grown the inventory from where it was from day one. But we have a lot of things on back order. I mean, from one brand, one company, I showed you last week, we have 10 different facings on back order, give or take. And I mean, I can't tell you there's probably not one single brand in there that we don't have something on back order on right now. From Iroa to Ashton to Roma de Cuba. I mean, we can't even get Fuente. We've been approved for our account, and it's something that people ask about every day, but we can't even get any product until they okay us, which may take a few more months, 3 to 6 months, until they're able to send us our initial order.
So what is your natural response to someone who's coming to the vintage for the first time? You happen to be in the humidor, and they tell you, listen, that Hemingway I smoke all the time, and it just so happens where they live, they were able to have access to it right now because someone had stocked up. Mm-hmm. But they're here up for work for a little while, and you're trying to, turn them on to something new. How does that conversation go?
Well, you gauge what they want. So he'll come in and say, Hemingway. And myself, John Dwyer, and our staff all know those keywords, Fuente, Hemingway. Okay, go through your Rolodex and be like, all right, this is what we have in the humidor that's similar. And it's important for us to continuously teach our staff that, so they have that Rolodex. So that way there's no lack of service, because you don't want anyone to walk in and be like, oh, you don't have what I have, but I'm leaving.
Right.
And I think we've done a really good job of collectively, navigating people to something else. And I always use as an example, people ask for Fuente. We always use Ashton as a backup plan, because a lot of people don't know, but Ashton is made all by Fuente in the Fuente factory. So like an Opus X is an ESG, and so on and so forth. So if you can use that lingo, oh, well, you like Nicaraguan, let me show you the godfather of Nicaragua, Don Pepin, my father products. Or Placencia, you like Rocky Patel, sell you Placencia, I mean, that's kind of how you can navigate your way through the humidor realistically and truthfully, so that way the consumer doesn't feel like they're still getting what they asked for, but with a different cigar.
I mean, that builds a ton of credibility to be able to demonstrate the fact that you're aware of the tobacco that was used in that cigar you mentioned is actually used in this one as well. Might have a different wrapper, but the rest of the elements are the same because the same people are making them. I mean, that's a tremendous demonstration of knowledge that most people don't even get when they're trying to go to a wine bar and they're trying to dig deep into a certain varietal. So that, I feel like it's something that's uncanny. It's something you don't normally find even in a advanced retail setting. But at the same time, and I know it's a hot topic, so bear with me, but while these things are on back order, you also have odd things occurring frequently in DC where they're talking about possible regulation of It seems like the world of flavored cigars, or that more sweeter profile, is what they're targeting, as whether it be taxes or who can buy them. Can you just share with us, try to break it down in layman's terms, what is happening and if there's anything we could be doing about it?
Sure. So in 2008, a bill was introduced called the Family Prevention Smoking Act, Tobacco Control Act of 2009. That passed and became federal law, where the FDA now has the right to regulate the premium cigar industry and the tobacco industry as a whole. They were already regulating cigarettes. And the issue was raised because vaping became so popular and young kids were dying and having health issues from vaping. But with any government, they just group everything into one category. And so this is an ongoing 20-year plus battle that the premium cigar industry has been fighting and losing and winning. And so that goes back to 2009. For the first 6 years, nothing changed. And in 2015, going into 16, they came back and said, well, here's what we're going to do. Basically, we're going to regulate the tobacco industry because we want more taxes. We want you to, pay your fair share, et cetera. But we want to know what's in these cigars that you're smoking. And the lobbyists and the big, family tobacco companies like the J.C. Newmans, the Fuentes, Rocky Patel, Lito Gomez, Padron have been pushing for an exemption because this, like we talked about earlier, is binder filler wrapper, organic, hand-grown, handmade, no additives, no chemicals, nothing like a cigarette. And if you don't know that, you just assume smoking is smoking. And it's funny because over the last 7 years, the FDA has put out studies that they've done, their own studies, that have said that if you smoked one cigar a day, every day for 7 days, so basically an average of 7 cigars a week, collectively as a whole, in a group study that they did, you're 0.001% likely to get any cancer. So they put out their own study, they've done their own study to prove that premium cigars are not the same as chemically added nicotine, etc., and tobacco and anything else.
Which we would lobby is because of the lack of the additives that others would use in products where the percentage is higher.
Well, this is all 100% organic tobacco.
Got it.
So, I mean, even in the nicotine levels, a tobacco leaf as a whole has a stem. 95% of all nicotine is in the stem of the tobacco. If you ever watched a factory or production, that stem is cut out, and then they use this side of the leaf and this side of the leaf. Those stems go into a bag, which is collected every single cigar roller in every factory, and then they sell that to cigarette companies to make, machine-made products. Mm-hmm. So part of the regulation in general was, let's get young people to stop smoking under the age of 18. Last year, they did push that through, and now the smoking age is 21. I don't know if you knew that or not. In general, like all around, is 21. A lot of people still don't know. So you can't even buy cigarettes unless you're 21. So that's there was a give and take. The lobbying side and then the premium cigar industry side says, hey, what do you want from us? Because right now, you're taking us away from our livelihood. And you potentially, if the FDA got what they wanted and what they've asked for in a whole, I'd say 65% of the cigar industry would be affected and 65% of our humidor would be affected, because now those cigars that were not predicated before, it was originally 2008. They moved it to 2016, August 2016, and now it's kind of hovering between 18 and 20, depending on what they agree upon. It's gone back and forth through federal courts. Then if it's not on the market before that time, whatever that time decides, it was originally 08, then you can't sell it legally in the United States. It has to go through an approval process, much like pharmaceutical drugs do, much like food does, and everything else. And the cigar industry because we sell liquor here, is saying, well, hey, you're not telling these distilleries in Kentucky or wherever, or anywhere, what they can't put with what they're doing to their spirits. So why are you telling us this is a premium product? This is a leisure product. It's a luxury product. It's a celebratory product. It's not a habit. It's a hobby. And so there's a lot of money behind it, but there's always more money behind the big corporations. And, unfortunately, we're the little guys. I mean, the premium cigar industry probably is 0.1% of the whole tobacco industry in the United States.
Sure.
It's a little guy compared to dollars, but we have a lot behind it, a lot of support between Premium Cigar Association, Cigar Rights of America, the Cigar Association of America. And so it's important for people to know that, hey, like for example, us, we're smoking this cigar today. Technically, if the law was passed and fully enforced, we couldn't sell this because it was made after the predicate date. So what we would have to do is we would take this recipe to the federal government, the FDA, give them our recipe, give them the cigars, and tell them to regulate it. They would put it through this machine and they would DNA test it and everything else. And then if they approved it, they would now allow it to be sold. Mm-hmm. In that process comes dollars. So we have one facing, one size. It's about $50,000. That's the fee. So imagine someone who has 10 facings and 3 sizes in each face. Mm-hmm. Do the math. How do you afford that in fees and no guarantee that you're going to be, able to sell this product in 3 to 5 years when they get around to it? And
that's like a local distillery submitting their bottle and their labeling and everything else to a state controlled like North Carolina is. There's no guarantee that they'll get approved for it to be sold within the state. Mm-hmm. I heard you just say a term. What do you mean by predicate date?
So that was a term that the FDA put out that said, if your cigars were not on the market before August 2008, that was the original time, which is the predicate date, you would have to go through what's called substantial equivalence, which is basically what I just stated, that you would have to submit your cigars to get federal approval by the government to be now sold in the U.S. Mm-hmm. So there are several companies that started in 2014, 2015 that went out of business because it seemed like at the time that was going to happen in 2016. And, fortunately, a federal judge in the court of D.C. shot it down and said, we're not going to give you the money to regulate the premium cigar industry when you can't even keep up with your backlogs of other things that you have to do on the pharmaceutical side and the food side. So that kind of seized everything up for 3 years, going into the 4th year. So fortunately, nothing's changed other than the 21 tobacco part, the 21 age, and tobacco taxes. And I think it doesn't make sense so we have the FDA, which is a federal agency regulating federal goods for a product. When we talk about the ATF, right, alcohol, tobacco, firearms. So this is a federal imported product. There's a FET, federal export tax that you pay when you bring it in as a cigar manufacturer. So much like the beer industry and the distilling industry, the cigar manufacturer has to make it in their factory, sell it to themselves, which is a distribution company, and then distribute it in the U.S. and then basically pay themselves and then use channels in the U.S. to get it to the consumer, or to the retailer, I should say, and then it's up to us to then sell it to the individual retailer. That's the chain of command going from the factory to here. So legally, a factory can't sell to us. They have to have a second company to be able to sell to us.
So what is the lawmaker's argument that is a benefit? Is it consistency in the process? What is the argument right now?
You want my opinion?
Oh, I'm just curious. Like what you've heard, what do they believe is going to be of value out of all this?
So some people think that by regulating the cigar industry or tobacco as a whole, we're limiting the amount of underage smokers and health risks. Hence why they did the health study. The argument on the cigar side is, well, you've already done this health study and you've proven that that's not necessarily a thing. And we've also proven that there's not a lot of people under the age of, at the time, 18, acquiring or trying to buy premium cigars. What happens, though, is there's some convolution between cigar makers. We talked about the Big Four. Every company in the Big Four also has holdings and businesses on the tobacco side when it comes to snuff, machine-made cigarettes, machine-made cigarillos, and flavored infused and all that kind of stuff.
So something like this wouldn't affect them as drastically.
Yes,
Okay.
because they have more money and deeper pockets. So they may lose, let's say, we talk about a brand, Fuente, a body. They'll cut their arm off and say, okay, we still have, another arm and two legs. Altria or whoever will lose a pinky in the grand scheme of things. But then they also have more control over the industry because they control manufacturing, distribution, and the warehouses, and they have the money and the power behind it. So there's a constant battle between the family brands, right? J.C. Newman, Fuente, Padron, Lido, P. Johnson, Tatuaje, my father, Ernesto Perez Carrillo, etc., and Alan Rubin from Alec Bradley, fighting this fight with the FDA, but they're also fighting the big companies that are trying to push them out of the business so that way they can sell their product. And I mean, I was just in Vegas with Dan at the PCA, the Premium Cigar Association's trade show. And one of the biggest factors that I took away from that speech that Carlito said was, at the end of the day, we love this industry, we love cigars, and they're fighting every day for the little guy, for the small boutique cigar manufacturer that may go out of business if regulations happen. And all we really want is an exemption. You can regulate us all you want. You want it to be taxed? Fine. We're already taxed. You need to up that tax? That's fine. But give us some explanation. We're at this for 21 years and the FDA still hasn't basically defined this is what we want from you. Mm-hmm. And it's gone back and forth between different, campaigns and presidencies and on both sides of the aisle. But it's just the politics. It is what it is. I mean, it's going to happen one way or the other. It's just, we have to be aware of it. As consumers, we have to be aware of what's happening so we can be supportive of it. And if you like premium cigars and you like to keep things on the market, then it's kind of what has to happen. I mean, it doesn't make sense why, if the number one killer in the U.S. is driving, right? You get into a car accident. There's car accidents every day. But the FDA is not going to GM and to Ford and saying, hey, we're going to regulate how you make all your products. Mm-hmm. They're not. And so it shouldn't make any difference on the cigar side or spirits. No one's going to Kentucky and telling Buffalo Trace, what's in that mash bill? What's in that recipe? You can't sell any more new products unless we approve it and you pay a bunch of money to get it approved. And we're sorry if it doesn't get approved. That's on you. You just lost a bunch of money. So it is what it is. I mean, you see the big boom of the bourbon and all these craft distilleries popping up. It's the same thing on the cigar side. It's a different product. I mean, and a lot of these cigar manufacturers are willing to give something to get the exemption. But it's a very divisive topic because you have these these lobbies for anti-smoking everything. And you have these big corporations that are throwing a bunch of money at it to get it passed because they're going to benefit. And then you're trying to push out the little guy. So it's always going to be a David and Goliath fight. So the best thing, I mean, it could get an exemption today, and a new administration comes into office and changes that whole thing. There's never going to be a permanent solution.
Now you say that, and it just makes me think, because it's clear that smaller guys, bigger guys are viewing it very differently. So it sounds like if legislation were to pass the way it's being discussed, does it sound like for the future, would that result in the Big Four just absorbing everybody else because they have the pockets to deal with FDA approval and submission?
Yes. Yes, and a lot of these smaller guys would either go bankrupt or sell to just get out of the business to get what they can, or just sell internationally and not ever sell in the U.S. again. So it just depends on what they want to do and where they are. I mean, not especially with COVID. I mean, a lot of the cigar companies aren't in the greatest financial place anyways right now, even though they're because they're been running on fumes this whole time, trying to build up their production. So it's only time will tell. But I mean, I can see, and there's these moves, right, where the big four are buying other brands, and they've kind of collectively, let's see, like the split, right? So we talked about Altria divested themselves out of the premium cigar industry. Mm-hmm. Imperial did too, and went to this Chinese company. So Altadas is now, split up. But there's always something bigger at play, right? It's every industry, it's just big business, and it's big money and big tobacco. I mean, it doesn't make sense to me as a consumer, but one of the big four companies owns RJ Reynolds, right? One of the largest cigarette companies in the world, but they also make cigars. And then same with Swisher, we talked about that. So at the end of the day, I mean, time will tell and see where we are. Hopefully there's enough money and lobbying behind and getting the right people involved to fight the FDA. I mean, it's an ongoing process. You can go on the PCA's website, you can go on Cigar Rights of America's website and read more about it. You can read about the bills that have been introduced for the exemption, the taxation bill. I mean, there's another bill on the table right now where they would have a new federal tax, 500% increase. So we'll call it, this is $12. Sure. We would have $6 in tax. So we would now have to sell this for $18 to make money, to cover the tax. Who's going to pay that? The consumer, because we're going to pass it down to the consumer.
Mm-hmm. Well, it sounds like you have already answered that question of, as a consumer, what they can do to stay informed. Is there anything else that, as someone who is, really enjoying this as a hobby and enjoying what it brings to a unique concept like this, is there anything else that, Joe Schmo can be doing just to show that they are in support of the little guy trying to, continue to make a name for themselves, whether it be keeping the jobs in Central America or what have you.
Yeah.
What else can the little guy do?
Well, so you touched on jobs. So if the FDA ruling went into effect and it fully went into effect, you're talking about 500,000 people who would be unemployed in 4 countries. Where do those people go? Now you've created a new problem, because now you've created a problem where 500,000 people are trying to find a better way of life, and they're going to try to migrate into the U.S. to find jobs. And now you have an immigration issue. I mean, there's a big trickle-down effect of what can happen, even though we're so small in the industry. But, I mean, in general, check out the websites. Definitely sign up, register, become a member. They're always asking for donations. Another one we can do is Cigar for Warriors. Every cigar shop, and we're going to do this too, we do the Cigar for Warriors, where you donate cigars or money, and they collect it in a basket, and then they donate it to all the people that are deployed overseas. So all that, every little bit helps. Whether you donate, whether you register, you become an ambassador of the program to be informed. You get on the mailing list. We're going to do an event here to be able to educate more consumers on Cigar Rights of America and the PCA. I'm actually going to go to a dinner in October in DC to learn where we are in the state of the industry as a whole. Mm-hmm. So everything little helps. Watching this video and understanding the intricacies of the cigar industry and what it means to businesses like us, and really just divulging, just like you divulge in any spirit industry or any other industry that you are passionate about.
Sounds like we have our calls to action. We'll make sure to add links and everything to the video so everybody knows where to go. In the meantime, I know it's some caffeine, but cheers me. Cheers. I appreciate you taking the time to
Thank you for having me.
Educate us and inform us, and look forward to future connections as we see what happens next.
Appreciate it. Thank you very much.